Hi, CI 3338 and social studies teachers. Welcome to this presentation of wise choices. This is the second part of our talking about, learning about, reading about economy and teaching economy in elementary school. This particular situation, though, I'm going to have you think like kids first and then go into adult mode. And I want you thinking bigger and more critically about a couple of topics that have to do with economy and problems in economy, consequences of certain problems and choices and such. In this one, you will need something to write on and with as you go through this presentation. I'm going to ask that you stop the video at certain points, write down a couple of things, and then proceed or continue on through the presentation. There's a video I want you to watch during this, which the link is available to you on Tracks. And then at the end, I'm going to ask you to write an essay, which will be Dropboxed before we meet again. So we'll get through all of this quickly. And don't forget to bring with you the notes you jot down today and the Dropbox, the essay, before class next time we meet. So let's begin with wise choices. The objectives for today are to have you make some decisions about how your choices affect others. You'll defend your ideas by writing. Normally, if we were going to meet in class, we would do something where you were standing up and move to particular corners in the room. But in this case, I'm going to ask you to write a little bit about it. You'll express a situation in which one individual can make a difference. Look at 5 problems and consequences presented in the Lorax. You'll list one choice you can make to improve your community. And then we'll look at the definitions of problems and consequences, and you'll write an essay over an economic problem and its consequences or consequence. First, I want you to jot down 5 to 10 things you have chosen to do today. It's only 1:45 where I am now recording this, and I've had to make quite a few decisions today. Not only was I going to call my trainer and cancel my workout with her today, which I did not, but also after my workout, what should I eat? If I need some protein, I have to go to the grocery store, so I have to decide which grocery store am I going to go to. And then I get home and which thing did I buy that I really want to eat today, and all of that good stuff. What choices have you made today? Pause the video and write down 5 to 10 things that you've already chosen to do today. With those choices in mind, I want you to now write what you think about this. The topic is, or the statement is, the choices I make influence others. If you believe in this wholeheartedly, absolutely, no question, then I want you to respond to this statement with that response and why you believe so wholeheartedly that the choices you make influence others. The yes option in this response would be, well, yeah, I make some decisions that affect others, but not all of my decisions affect others. If you believe maybe my decisions affect others, then respond that way and tell me why. And if you think, no, absolutely not, I make my decisions for myself, other people make decisions for themselves, the choices I make do not influence others, use that as your response and then tell me why. Again, pause the presentation and tell me your response to this statement. Do you absolutely believe the choices you make influence others? Yes, you believe that the choices you make influence others. Maybe the choices I make influence others. Or no, the choices I make do not influence others. Pause the presentation and write, please. So why do we talk about choices we make? For kids, making choices can be very significant. If they're a child who needs things, lives in a condition that they're not given much love, much material, much food, much something, they have to make some serious decisions every day. As these kids get older, maybe even as teenagers, they have to choose to go to school or stay home and watch the brothers and sisters, or maybe get a job instead of go to school. So we're starting to think about how our choices influence other things in our lives. In a classroom with kids, and we're thinking about some topic this huge, we can illustrate making these types of choices by reading and or watching the movie The Lorax. And that's where you'll start now. The Lorax is a Dr. Seuss story. It was published back in the 60s. And as fantastic as it is as timeless in regard to the topic of the story and how we are still dealing with some of the things that Dr. Seuss wrote about in this particular story. So what I'd like for you to do is pause the presentation and move over to Tracks. On Tracks, I've presented to you the link to a 25-minute animated movie that follows the book pretty much page by page, word for word. Watch the movie, and then after you finish the movie, come back to this presentation and we'll continue through the rest of this presentation. What I want you to look for while you're watching the movie is what problems and consequences occur throughout the story. You may pause the video and pause the PowerPoint presentation and then move over to the video. Come back to the presentation as soon as you're done with the movie. So we define problems and consequences in this particular part of our presentation because, number one, when you're teaching this, you want your kids to understand the differences because you're talking about problems and consequences in this case. We've kind of morphed from strictly talking about economy and money to how economy and money and making decisions regarding making money can affect us. So we think of problems as a noun. The word problem is a noun. It's a thing or an idea. We can have more than one, as some of us know really well. And the definition is a matter or situation regarded as unwelcome or harmful and needing to be dealt with and overcome. Consequence, then, is also a noun. It is a thing or an idea. We can have plural consequences, and that is a result or an effect of an action or a condition. So you've just watched the Lorax, and I asked you to think about the problems and consequences that were occurring because of the problems throughout the story. So what I want you to do now is, again, pause the presentation and list 5 problems and the subsequent consequences that were presented in the Lorax. And then I also want you to think about where you live and if there are any situations, problems, anything going on in your community that you feel you could make an improvement to, list that choice that you could make to improve your community. What would you do to improve your community? Pause the presentation and come back as soon as you're finished with your notes. So in an elementary education classroom, you're teaching social studies and you're touching on the economic topic. Again, the Lorax can take this to a much more critical thinking situation. You can have children thinking about the impact of economy by choosing to recycle and how that benefits our environment, or the consequences to not choose to recycle. Um, what other things could you think of that your students might do that could be an idea following the Lorax? Even if it were just walking to school every day, if they live in a neighborhood school and they walk to school every day, what would be the impact or the consequence of walking to school every day versus taking the bus? So what kinds of things do you think you could bring up with your students? I just want you thinking about that right now. You don't have to write about that, but this is definitely something that I think you could bring into your classroom and talk to your children by reading this book and talking about the impacts of economy and industry and making money and those sorts of things with your students. And now we move to the more adult portion of this, and I want you thinking as critical thinking college students, just to better inform your views of problems and consequences, especially when it comes to economy. I don't know if you've noticed, but the economy kind of rules everything. Money rules everything. So if you think of it that way and start looking at different situations going on around the world, you'll kind of be able to get to the root of all of some of the problems and consequences that we see. Much of it has to do with money. All of it has to do with money. So what I'm going to ask that you do is write an essay. And I want you to choose from one of the following topics. I will put a little caveat here and say that if you have a topic that you've heard about that you're interested in and you want to do a little bit more reading about and would want to write about it, just let me know what topic that is and I can approve that for you. But otherwise, I want you to consider one of these that are listed on the screen. One would be pretty important to you is education funding. Where does the money to run public schools come from? And then once it gets to one spot, how is it dispersed or where does it go? And who benefits the most out of receiving education funding? Is it the school districts? Is it the state? Is it the global economy at all because we have educated population? I mean, think about where the money's coming from and where it goes. Brexit is sort of an abbreviation. I can't think of what the word is right now, but Brexit is a conglomeration of two words, Britain and exit. About 4 years ago, the citizens of the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union, which in this case was and is sort of a United States of Europe. With Britain and the United Kingdom leaving the European Union, there is an immense amount of conversation and decision making being made because of potential economic issues. So I want you to think about how will the United Kingdom leaving the European Union affect the global economy? How will that hurt the world and the world economy? Another you could choose would be the major effects of poverty on students' abilities to learn. You may have already learned from some of your education courses that students who live in poverty are lacking the ability to concentrate because they don't have the energy from nutritious foods or they're unable to sleep at night. So I want you to think about the major effects of poverty on students' abilities to learn and take that bigger. If a student's not learning, then what are the consequences of that? These are huge topics, and I want you to get deep into it and think very, very broadly about the overall impacts of these things. Another topic you might want to consider reading about and then writing about is closing the border. Will it only affect us in the US being able to buy avocados? What other effects could there be from closing the border, specifically the border between the US and Mexico? There's another border you might want to consider. Venezuela is a country in South America, and they are currently in an incredible economic and political crisis. And neighboring countries of Venezuela are absorbing many refugees from Venezuela. So what if Colombia decided to close the border and Venezuelans were not able to get in there? Same thing with Syria and neighboring countries of Syria. Same thing with currently Tripoli in Libya. There are people fleeing the capital of Libya because of current um, bombs situation, a very dangerous situation there. What if the local countries decided to close their borders? Lastly, another topic that you might want to choose to read about and write about are some economic impacts of the last 17 years of war in the Middle East. Specifically, the two countries most directly involved were Afghanistan and Iraq. You might remember from a Kite Runner that Afghanistan has actually been part of a wartime situation a number of times. I just want you to think about the last 17 years. Um, so, what impacts does being at war for 17 years have on an economy in a country? For an essay, there's a specific format I want you to follow. I'm not necessarily concerned about length of pages, but because I'm looking for depth and critical thinking in these topics, I definitely want you to form your thesis, which may or may not be an opinion. I kind of lean toward not giving me much opinion because I want you to be informed and I want this to come from factual data. So write your opening paragraph and include your beliefs or your thesis of your essay. Follow that up with some supporting details and paragraphs, and then end it with a closing paragraph that summarizes and wraps up your initial thesis. Use your library access to access scholarly articles and other newspaper information. Definitely, you may look at magazines and such, but make sure that they're not vetted, but make sure that they're like well researched, and they don't need to be peer reviewed, but they don't need to be People Magazine either. I don't want entertainment. I want you to have information. So if you look at magazine information, go toward The Economist or The Atlantic magazine or something that has a more news and information source rather than entertainment source. View or listen to news programs such as BBC World, PBS NewsHour, and NPR does a morning edition and All Things Considered, which is in the afternoon. So you've got multiple opportunities to listen to news programs. You may research these online and find something that might work. Podcasts are also really good. There are some really great podcasts out there of people who are doing some really great research and reporting about it in podcast form. Report your findings using minimal opinion or conjecture. I really just want you to keep your deeply personal opinions out of some of these topics. It's good practice because you're not to let your students know where you stand on certain things. You have to at least appear to be very objective rather than subjective. So be very careful in your essay to not go too deep into your deeply personal opinions on these topics. And then, of course, finish your essay, Dropbox it into tracks by 6:30 on the next time we meet, which is the 18th of April. If you have any questions or need some more guidance on what I'm asking you to do here, feel free to contact me. Otherwise, thanks for listening to our presentation and watching the Lorax. I look forward to seeing you on the 18th.